This is Britain in 1953, the coronation year. The year Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay reached the summit of Everest on the 29th of May. And the news arrived in London in time to be printed in the papers on the morning of the coronation itself. The 2nd of June, as though the world had arranged itself as a gift for a young queen. Rationing is still in force. The National Health Service celebrated only its 5th birthday in July of that year. Approximately 8.5 million television licenses had been issued, and the coronation would be the first major event broadcast live to a British public, who, in many cases, crowded around a neighbor's set to watch because their own household did not yet own one. And across every city, every town, every pit village and fishing port and cathedral city, and market town on this island, millions of men, women, and children are beginning their mourning in ways that would, within a single generation, become almost entirely unrecognizable. Not because anyone decided to abandon them, but because the world shifted beneath them, quietly and completely. While everyone was busy getting on with things, these are 15 of those mourning habits. 15 ordinary rituals from a Britain that still remembered the war, still felt it in its bones and its larder and its habits. And by the time we reach the last one, I think you will find that something in you recognizes what has been lost, even if you never lived it yourself. The very first thing you did when you got out of bed was not check anything. There was nothing to check. The first thing you did before your eyes had fully adjusted, before you had spoken a single word, was lay the fire. In 1953, approximately 73% of British homes were heated exclusively by solid fuel, coal, coke, or in rural areas, wood, with no central heating of any kind. The fireplace was not a feature. It was not a design choice. It was the reason the room was habitable, and laying it correctly was a skill every child acquired by the age of 7 or 8, passed down not through formal instruction, but through observation, through kneeling beside a parent and watching, through being handed the job on a Saturday morning when hands were needed. You started with the ash. Yesterday's ash, still faintly warm at the center if the fire had been banked properly the night before, raked into the metal ash bucket with a small iron shovel. Then the newspaper, the previous day's Daily Mirror, or News Chronicle, torn into sheets and twisted into tight cylinders, then arranged crosswise to create pockets of air. Because a fire without air is not a fire at all, it is just heat trying to happen and failing. Then the kindling, small dry sticks often bought in penny bundles from the corner shop or collected from wherever dry wood could be found, laid over the paper in a loose pyramid. Then the coal, placed carefully, one piece at a time, so as not to collapse the structure beneath. Then the match, a Bryant and May match, struck against the side of the box with the particular confidence of someone who has done this 400 times before. Then the careful watching, then the adjusting. A badly laid fire was a cold morning, a late breakfast. A well-laid fire was warmth within 20 minutes, the coal beginning to glow at its edges. The smell of coal smoke filtering through the house, simultaneously acrid, and to anyone who grew up inside it, indisputably the smell of home. By the mid-1960s, natural gas central heating was beginning its expansion. The Gas Council launched major promotional campaigns in 1966. And by 1971, the newly formed British Gas Corporation was connecting more than 1 million new customers every year. By 1973, the morning fire was a minority practice. By 1985, it had become largely aesthetic. A wood-burning stove in a house that already had radiators, a nostalgic choice, a lifestyle item photographed for home magazines. But for the generation born between 1930 and 1950, this ritual, the ash, the paper, the kindling, the coal, the match, was the first act of every single morning of their working lives, and giving it up was not relief so much as a strange, unacknowledged bereavement. Hot water was the second quest. In 1951, a government survey found that 37% of British homes lacked a fixed bath of any kind. And 18% had no indoor toilet whatsoever. These were not rural curiosities or extreme cases. These were the standard conditions of urban working-class life in post-war Britain. Hot water, where it existed at all, often came from a single back boiler connected to the kitchen range, and even then the pressure was unreliable, the supply limited, and the temperature variable enough that you approached the tap with a certain provisional optimism rather than expectation. Most families operated on a weekly bath cycle, Saturday evening, in order of age or importance, in water that had been heated on the range and carried in buckets to a tin bath set on the kitchen floor, the water growing cooler with each successive occupant. On the other 6 mornings of the week, you washed at the kitchen sink, a flannel dipped in water that was as hot as the kettle had managed, a bar of Lifebuoy carbolic soap, manufactured by Lever Brothers since 1894, with a smell so specific and so functional, sharp, medicinal, bordering on antiseptic, that it announced cleanliness in a way that no modern fragrance has ever quite replicated. You washed your face, your neck, your hands, your arms to the elbow. You did this quickly, because the kitchen was cold until the fire caught, and lingering over ablutions was not something the 1950s encouraged. Now, the chamber pot. This is the detail that causes modern audiences to pause completely, and it deserves to be understood rather than dismissed. As late as 1954, in the pre-war terraced housing that still accommodated the majority of Britain's urban working-class population, a chamber pot beneath the bed was not an eccentricity, it was standard provision. The alternative, going downstairs in the dark and cold, then often through a back door across an unlit yard to a shared outdoor privy, was simply not realistic at 3 in the morning in February. The outdoor privy itself was its own world, shared in many terraced streets between 4, 5, or 6 households. It was a small brick structure with a wooden seat, a chain pull, or a bucket flush, and on the nail beside the door, squares of torn newspaper. Not as an affectation, not as a charming rustic detail, as toilet paper. Commercial toilet paper existed. Izal medicated tissue had been available since 1896, and Bronco was another option. But it was an additional household expense that millions of families simply did not routinely make. The Daily Herald and the Daily Sketch served the purpose admirably. Andrex launched its now iconic soft tissue advertising campaign in 1972, featuring a golden Labrador puppy. Before that campaign normalized the expectation of softness, and for decades before that, the newspaper served perfectly well, and nobody thought to remark on it. Breakfast was built from absence as much as from choice. Rationing had shaped British eating since January 1940. And its end was gradual and piecemeal. Tea came off ration in October 1952, sweets and chocolate in February 1953, a date remembered by school children of the era with clarity. That suggests it was genuinely one of the more significant days of their childhoods. Butter and margarine rationing ended in May 1954. The very last items, meat and bacon, came off ration on the 4th of July 1954, 14 years and 6 months after rationing began. 14 years. To have spent your entire childhood and adolescence measuring, counting, presenting a ration book at the counter, is to have a relationship with food that is fundamentally different from anything that came after. The psychological residue of those years was present in every 1950s kitchen. You did not leave food on your plate. You did not pour away tea that was still drinkable. You did not throw away the heel of the loaf. These were not rules that anyone wrote down. They were simply what you did, as naturally and unthinkingly as breathing, because your body remembered a time when none of it could be wasted. Bread and dripping sat on the breakfast table. The dripping, rendered fat from the Sunday joint, collected in a white enamel bowl and left to set, with the dark jelly of meat stock settled at the bottom, was spread on thick slices of white bread and salted. It sounds extraordinary from the distance of 70 years. It tasted, to those who grew up eating it, like the most reassuring food in the world. Porridge was made on the hob, not the 2-minute microwavable version of today, not the artisanal oat bowls topped with activated charcoal, but a proper pot of oats cooked slowly, stirred with a wooden spoon worn smooth from use, salted in the Scottish tradition, or sweetened with golden syrup, thick enough when ready to barely move in the pan, tinned tomatoes on toast, a boiled egg when eggs were available, perhaps a scraping of fish paste, the particular pungent salmon pink paste that came in small glass jars, and tea. Always tea. Made properly, in the pot with boiling water, left to brew for 4 minutes, poured through a strainer into cups that already held a splash of milk. The cooperative society had more than 11 million members, and its grocery counters, where the assistant measured your tea into a paper bag, were a fixture. The milk arrived before any of this. In 1950, approximately 100,000 registered milk roundsmen were operating. Delivering glass pint bottles to roughly 96% of British households. The electric milk float moved through the pre-dawn streets like something from another world, and the roundsman who drove it knew his route with the intimacy of someone who has walked the same ground for 20 years. He knew that number 14 always took 2 pints on a Wednesday. He knew if it was still on the doorstep, he should knock. He left notes. The sound his bottles made, the particular clear glass clink as they were set down on a stone doorstep in the dark, is one of those sounds that is recalled completely, not as memory but as sensation, as the feeling of being 7 years old on a school morning with the whole day still ahead of you. By 1975, 94% of households received delivery. By 2023, around 3. The streets he moves through are quieter now. The wireless came on with the fire, or shortly after. In the early 1950s, transistor radios were not yet widely affordable. The first British transistor set, the PAM 710, launched in 1956 at £9.15, roughly equivalent to £40 today. It was tuned to the BBC Home Service, which reached 97% of the population and operated on the assumption that its listeners were adults. The morning news bulletin at 7 o'clock was a serious affair. Families stopped what they were doing for it. The announcer's voice, measured, authoritative, delivered the news of the world into millions of kitchens simultaneously, and people listened with a quality of attention nearly impossible to replicate. There was one bulletin. It came once, and then it was over, and you carried it with you through the day, and if you wanted to know more, you waited for the evening paper. Children walked to school, not accompanied, not monitored, walked. A survey in 1955 found 85% traveled independently. A 7-year-old in 1955 moved through familiar streets with the confidence of someone trusted with their own body and judgment. They passed the bakers, where the bread smell rolled out over the cold pavement. They passed the tobacconists with pipe tobacco in sealed tins. They stopped at the newsagent to look at the comics. They arrived at school, slightly red-cheeked from the cold, and nobody tracked them on a device. By 2020, the average age for independent travel had risen to 10 years and 9 months. Utterly ordinary in 1955 has become exceptional. Fathers left the house before breakfast. The 6-day working week was standard. A man employed at the Longbridge Austin plant would have left by 6:30. Or at the Yorkshire coalface, or at any manufacturing site that constituted the backbone of the British economy in 1953, he left by 6:30. He ate quickly, if he ate at all. The morning belonged to the woman who remained, who managed the fire and the children and the packed lunches and the shopping list, and who would still be managing these things when he returned at 5:30 in the evening. This was not discussed. The pattern was so total. The packed lunch was assembled in grease-proof paper and newspaper for insulation. The filling, Shipham's fish paste or potted beef or corned beef gelatinous at the edges. A scrape of Heinz salad cream, not mayonnaise, an apple or orange peeled and wrapped, a rich tea or nice biscuit. Food was fuel, nothing more. Clothes were not changed every day. A school uniform was worn all 5 days. A working man's shirt for 2 or 3 days, turned inside out. Fresh enough. The weekly wash, Monday without exception, was a major physical undertaking. As late as 1964, only 25% owned a machine. The wash was done in a copper boiler with a washboard and a mangle. The mangle, 2 rubber rollers, required respect. It could mangle fingers. Clothes were hung on the line if weather permitted, or dried on a wooden horse in front of the fire, acquiring that smell of scorched fabric and coal warmth. The coal in the air was not a metaphor. The great smog of London in December 1952 trapped cold air beneath warm, smoke from 4 million fires. Combined into a yellow-gray fog so dense visibility fell to less than 1 foot. It killed up to 12,000 people, the deadliest pollution event in British history. On any winter morning, coal smoke rose from millions of chimneys simultaneously. The air carried its weight, sulfurous, mineral, coating the back of your throat. The Clean Air Act of 1956 created smoke-free zones and mandated conversion of fireplaces. Change was gradual. The smell remained Britain waking up. Sunday morning was its own country. In 1950, 40% of adults attended church. Sunday morning observance was a social infrastructure. The bells began around 8. You heard them layered and overlapping. You dressed carefully in your Sunday suit smelling of mothballs. The church smelled of candle wax. The organ and the hymns and the vicar's voice arranged themselves like a structure, like walls of a room. Afterwards, the world felt slightly different. By 2020, regular attendance stood at 8%. The bells still ring, but the streets are largely empty now, full of people in running shoes or scrolling phones. The Sunday that millions knew, a shared civic rhythm, a weekly full stop, has retreated so completely that it is now difficult even to describe. And then there is the silence that underlies everything else. Not the silence of nothing. Your morning in 1953 was full of sound. Fire, wireless, bottles. The news came once at 7 o'clock, and then it was gone. The milk came once. Your neighbors were present, but your morning was not broadcast. It was not measured. Nobody was composing their day for an audience. Nobody received a notification requiring immediate attention. You moved through your morning, and it was real and local and complete. Every single item on this list, the fire in the dark, the chamber pot, the child walking alone, is a piece of a world that was not comfortable. The cold and scarcity were real. But something was present that is worth mourning. A specificity, a texture, a weight of lived experience that was particular and local and human. The smooth, frictionless modern morning cannot replicate it. If any part of this found something in you, if a smell came back, or a sound, then please leave it in the comments below. Tell us about your grandmother's fire. Tell us what Monday smelled like. These stories are the actual grain of British history, the history that does not appear in textbooks. Please subscribe and stay with us. Britain's story is not finished. We are still here, and we are very glad you are listening.